Next, we have Shang Yi, who loves what's interesting in technology. He mainly works with Java, Angular, HTML5, TypeScript. During the weekends, he occasionally codes on Ionic, sometimes cluelessly tinkers with Arduino. When he feels like he needs a change of scenery, he occasionally tries his hands on baking and cooking. He has a quick sense of humor and likes to indulge in creepypastas and occasionally binge on DIY videos. Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to talk to you on building conversational applications with actions on Google.
Ladies and gentlemen, up next, please welcome Google developer expert Lim Shang Yi.
Hello. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's very nice to meet all of you. So, my name is Lim Shang Yi. I'm actually Malaysian, from Malaysia, obviously. So, I just flew in yesterday to give you a talk about building actions for your community. So, before I go further on, I would like to wish that you all give yourselves applause for staying here, even though it's quite late. So give yourselves a round of applause for staying here even though it's really late. And I am just going to doze off. So yeah, let me just get started. So earlier on in the keynote sessions you saw on Google I/O is that there was very large focus on actions on Google or simply Google Assistant. So what I am here today is to teach you as developers, how can you leverage on what Google has built for you in order to create your own apps that leverage on actions on Google or Google Assistants in general. So earlier on, you noticed that they did some demonstrations about like Starbucks and stuff, right? And that way, how as a developer, you can build your own apps on top of Google Assistant. So with no further introduction, you should know what Google Assistant is. You can use it to search for information, you can search for queries, as well as you can ask it to do commands. Yep. So you can ask Google Actions to actually do create reminders, create reservations for you as well. So how do you actually leverage this kind of technology? Imagine with the correct mindset and the correct development platform, your applications can reach over 40 million devices, 400 million devices. Early on, it was upgraded from 400 million to 500 million on the keynote session. But imagine your application can reach this large number of users. So before we begin jumping straight into building an application, we first need to understand what is a conversational experience. So you've heard of the term user experience before, right? When you do software development. So you have stuff like UI, UX experiences. So you need to design beautiful UIs for your users that engage the users in your application. But in this case, for the Google Assistant, we have something called a conversational experience. How us as a developer can ensure that users are able to talk to your application in a very intuitive manner. So take, for example, when you issue a request to Google Actions or Google Assistant, you ask it like, hey, Google, can you create a reminder for me tomorrow? So what happens here is that when you say, hey Google, create a reminder, this is what we say as the user input, which what Google Assistant will interpret and convert into an action, and then the Google Assistant will reply you the answer. So this is the basic flow of how you actually build or how actions actually work on Google Assistant. So at the moment, there's a very large growing number of support for languages, including one thing is Hindi and English in India. So English in India has this very specific heavy accent that Google Assistant may have trouble recognizing in the past. But at the moment now, Google Assistant should work well if you configure your language preference to English India, and it also works for Hindi. So there is more and more larger growing numbers of languages that is always included in the Google Assistant so that you can cater your applications to more different users. So usually, how do you actually invoke an application on Google? So in the examples previously, you would use, hey Google, talk to the application name, or hey Google, get something. So if you notice that every time you want to call an app through your voice, you have to use the word hey Google. So what is this actually called? This is actually called explicit triggering. So what it means is that, let's say you have an application that does pizza delivery. So let's just conveniently say your app is called pizza delivery. So you can say, hey Google, talk to pizza delivery, and then your app comes into foreground and will be executed by Google Actions. So this is what we call as explicit triggering. So as what you see, that there is a trigger phrase, which is, okay Google, let's talk to application name. So of course, you can immediately jump into what your actions want to do. In this case, you can say, hey Google, get me pizza delivery for maybe a pepperoni pizza. So as you can see, you can include actions inside your phrase altogether in order to invoke something. So earlier on in the keynote, we now support 2 different actions running exactly in one sentence. So that has not been rolled out yet, but expect that to be included as well. Another way of actually triggering an application is through implicit triggering. That means sometimes you don't really know the name of the application you want to look for, right? In case, for example, the pizza delivery app might not exist, but you could say something like, hey Google, I would like to order some pizza. So what happens here is that the Google Actions or Google Assistants will go through their marketplace and search for third-party applications that has been developed to cater for pizza delivery. So this is what we mean by implicit triggering. We are asking Google Assistant to search for the application for you in order to run. So Google Actions, or Google Assistants in general, is a really magical experience you want users to engage with, especially when conversing with an application. So most of the time, we engage with applications by using your mouse, you click on buttons, you click on drop-downs. But in this context, we want the conversation between the user and the application to be like a human-like interaction. So we will consider it as a magical experience. So in order to create a magical experience, there are plenty of guidelines that you should use in order to give your app a real person life personality. And that you can go through this link, which goes you through some of the ways you can get your app to be more engaging to the users. So now, applications itself that runs on Google Actions or Google Assistants run on 2 different ways. As the first way you have seen is through your voice. So you ask the Google Assistant a question, and it will reply you with a voice output. However, besides voice, there's one more output you should take into consideration, which is the screen output. What this means is that we should sometimes supplement information to the user by showing them some information on your phone or on a screen. That way, the users are able to confirm what you have just said, as well as what the application has just replied. So let's take, for example, you would say, I would like to order 15 pizzas for my party. So they might, a Google Assistant might hear it wrong and might ask you, did you actually want to order 15 or 50? So that way you can actually see the text output listed in your phone so that you are sure that you're actually ordering 15 pizzas instead of 50. So how, as a third-party developer, how can we write applications that can show user input, that can show output to the users in a more rich context? So this is where Google has provided you with a standard development kit in order to display rich responses. So the first kind of response that you will always expect is just plain text, right? So I say something and that text appears on the screen. So this is the most pretty simple response you should receive from your application. However, if you sometimes decide that your application could give some suggestions to the user, for example, they don't really know what to say to the app, then you can use something called suggestion chips. So if you pull out your phone right now and you go to your Google Assistant, you'll notice that there are chips at the bottom that tell you what things that you can do with your application. So let's say, for example, you have an application that tells you the bus schedule, right? The bus schedule. So what do you want to tell the app? So there can be a few suggestions that can be listed here. So one of them can be, please tell me the next available bus schedule, or what are the buses available at this station. So all of these suggestions can be displayed on the UI in order to get the user to start interacting with. Because sometimes we are, as humans, right, we are more comfortable talking human to human, but not human to applications, right? So there's a time that we might find ourselves in a very awkward position in front of an application, and you just don't know what to say. So this is a good way for you to start engaging users to use your application. Another response that you can show on your application is through basic cards. So cards are used to display summary information and some graphics to supplement. So let's take, for example, you created an application that tells you tourist information about Sri Lanka. So I will go probably say, hey Google, get me the tourist guide for Sri Lanka. Let's say there is such an app. So then it pops out and you can ask, what are the top destinations that you can provide? So that, when that happens, you can, of course, supplement it with output as such, a card that shows the background image of the place that the users want to visit, a short summary of how to get there or what is it about. So this is a basic card display, a response that you can use in your application itself. The next thing you have are carousels. So carousels are just a list of cards that scroll horizontally. So when will you use this? So let's say, for example, you have an application now that actually does online shopping through your voice. Sounds cool, right? So you can say something like, hey Google, get me the latest specs of computers that you can find around this budget range, say for example. So Google can actually tell you all the answers you need and show them in the form of a carousel or a list. So that way, you as a user do not need to listen through every item. Let's say you have 10, 20 items, and sometimes you don't like someone yapping in your ears, nagging you, right? So it is best to present that information in the form of a UI, in this case, a carousel list or a list of items. So now, going to the most interesting part is how you as developers start building an applications with Google Actions. So one of the key pointers that Google has provided is that you can actually integrate it with something called a Dialog Flow. So Dialog Flow is a different company altogether from Dialog, just so you know. So Dialog Flow itself handles speech, language, natural language processing itself. So you as a developer do not need to worry about how can I convert speech into proper actions. That is the #1 challenge developers face when they try to build voice applications. So with Dialog Flow, you're able to create applications easily and let the natural language processing and all the machine learning all be done by Dialog Flow itself. So you don't really need to handle this information. And all of this can be done very easily with Dialog Flow. Let's take, for example, I have the bus schedule application. So the first question I will ask is, when will the bus when will the bus number 3 arrive? That is one example of how we can speak, right? But we can, of course, phrase it differently depending on the person. We could say, when is the bus number 3 coming? Or you can say, bus number 3, when shall it arrive? Something like that. So all of these permutations, all of these variations in the speech will cause a different, cause challenges to developers to develop an application to cater for different ways, different type of sentence structures. So how do we actually achieve this is with Dialog Flow, you are able to isolate what is necessary. In this case, bus number 3 is actually your parameter, which is the bus name, right? So with Dialog Flow, it is able to identify and isolate what constitutes as language, natural language, and what constitutes important information that you want your application to do. So in this case, your bus number 3 is actually your parameter, and your intention here is to get the bus arrival time. So let's take a look at building a static application on Google Actions. So take, for example, you have an application that just tells you some random jokes, for example. You just created something simple, and you just want it to tell you the same answer over and over again without any changes. So this is what we mean as a static application because it doesn't change at all. So let's take, for example, an animal joke app, right? So I can say, hey, Google, talk to animal joke. And then I'll ask you, what kind of animals joke do you want to hear? I will say, I want to listen to a dog joke. But when Google Actions or Google Assistant tells you the joke, it just uses the same word, dog. So you just say, the joke for dog is a joke. But the joke is always the same regardless of what animal you choose. So this is what we mean as a static application. So the other way that we as developers will most likely want to do this is to use actions on Google with Firebase. So imagine you have a third-party application that you have developed somewhere else, or you have a company that has already a user interface to do an application, but now you want to supplement that system with a voice user interface. So how do we actually do it? So there's a few things doing that, but before that, well, let's take a look at a few Firebase technologies we have. So before I begin going on, just a show of hands, how many of you have known Firebase for a while? Anyone has used it? Oh, cool. So in this example, what I'm going to show you is that you can use Firebase to actually perform this easily. So we can use a few things from Firebase. One of them is the cloud functions, which is responsible in handling the processing done through the Dialog Flow. And the other one is our real-time database or the Firestore database where you want to store information. So let me just show you an example of how this is actually performed in a real-world environment. You have your devices, you have your Google Assistant, you have your Dialog Flow, and the last two will be cloud functions and your database. So you can ask a question, for example, let's say a Bitcoin exchange. So you have a company that does your own Bitcoin exchange with a different rate, and you want to create a sample app like this. So of course, your rates will differ from international rates, right? So you will have your own rates stored in your DB, your own database, and you want Google Actions or Google Assistant to tell you the answer. So what happens here is that when Dialog Flow receives your intention, which is the intention to receive Bitcoin information, it will then use the Firebase Cloud function, which will call your API or call your database to retrieve the information and return out as a response. So let me just show you a quick demonstration of that. So right now, what I'm doing here is that I'm actually going to my Actions console. I'm just going to bring one of my test apps to foreground so that I can interact it with my phone. Okay, so let me just bring in the progress tracker here. So now I brought the app to foreground. You should see it on my phone at the moment. So let me just try to trigger it from my phone. So let me just increase the volume. OK, Google, talk to my test app.
According to Wikipedia,
Oh, that's not what I asked. Well, let me just ask you again. Talk to my test app. Talk to my test app. Talk to my test app.
Okay, let's get the test version of my test app. Welcome to Progress Tracker. Would you like to track a new task or list your existing ones?
Keep track of the project I am doing.
What's the start date for the project?
Next Friday. Next Friday.
When does the project end?
Next Friday.
All set. I am now keeping track of the task, the project. You have only 9 days before the deadline. Do you want to add another task?
No.
Okay, see you later. You can always track a task by talking to me.
So in this example, what I'm doing is I'm creating an application which is a progress tracker. So you can tell it to record down any kind of activity you want it to record. And then you can ask for a start date and an end date in order to keep track of its progress. So all of this data is actually stored in my database. So let's take a look at the database to see whether my data is there. So in my case, my database here is my Firebase Firestore. So let's take a look to see whether it is there. You will see here that the project I've created, which is listed here, and you will notice that the parameter for start date and end date is exactly what I said. It is next Friday. Next Friday is the 18th of May. You will notice that I said next Friday instead of the 18th of May. So how did they know next Friday is 18th of May? All of this is actually handled by Dialog Flow for you. So all you need to do is specify that the parameter that the user will speak is a type of a date. And then its natural language processing will then know how to convert the sentence into a readable value, in this case, a date. If you were to specify something else, like when they ask you the start date, you will say something like tomato or cat or dog, it will immediately ask you to repeat the question again because it is a failure. It doesn't pass the validation itself. So this is one of the examples that you can use for creating your application. So the last topic I want to talk to you about, how do you want to integrate IoT with actions on Google? It will be more fun, right? Imagine you can say, okay, Google, turn on my living room lights. Okay, Google, turn on something else. So all of this information, if you were to build it yourself, can be done. However, of course, you can buy third-party tools already done. But as developers, it is best, let's say, to create your own stuff, right? You can create your own coffee machine, your own soda mixers, and stuff like that. So let's take a look at some basic diagram of how this is achieved. So the first few rows are the same. Your intent processing, your actions are all the same. But the only difference here is that you have an IoT device. In this case, I have a Node MCU, which is an Arduino clone that contains a Wi-Fi shield. That is connected to the Firebase real-time database. So every time I issue an action on Google Assistant will immediately update the values in my database, and that in turn update my hardware to turn on and off the lights. So this is some of the examples that you can use in order to develop your applications. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring my IoT device today, so I'm just going to skip that. So these are some of the resources that you can use in order to understand more details of how to develop your own actions on Google applications. You can go through all these resources, and you can learn how to build your applications from A to Z, including Firebase integration as well. So take a picture. And before I end the session, I'd like to show you just one more demo that I did in Thailand. So I did the same talk in Thailand, but let me just show you something. I created an application called Thai Phrases because I don't know Thai. So let me just show you a quick example of how this works. Talk to Thai phrases.
Sure. Here's the test version of Thai phrases.
Hello, learn Thai phrases with me.
What phrases can I learn?
We have a few phrases that we think you might like. The phrases are hello,
What is thank you?
sorry,
What is thank you?
thank you is,
ขอบคุณครับ ขอบคุณครับ
So in this example, you will notice that the words here, krakum krab itself, is said in Thai itself, not in English as krakum krab. It is spoken natively according to the user's language. So with Google Actions, you can actually configure it to actually play music or play words in different intonations or different sounds. So imagine you can actually create an application that tells storybooks or tells the news in a certain native language without any problem. You can ask it in English and it can reply you with a different language if you must. So these are some of the ways that you can integrate Google Actions for your applications itself. So that's it I have for today. Thank you so much for your time.